found it interesting how this whole, like, this entire show is like a refutation of like the attitude of everybody who's currently making historical fiction. Hello and welcome to the Eye of the Storm podcast. I'm Daniel, and joining me today is Hervé.
Yep.
Today we are reviewing Shogun, the FX miniseries. The first half that's available at the time we're recording this. But before we dive in, Hervé, what's the best thing you watched recently?
So best thing I've watched recently is actually one that Jonathan mentioned previously. It's Anyone But You. It's just your kind of like
savior of the romantic comedy genre.
Yeah, no, do you know what? I actually feel like I'm a rom-com fan. You know, I hate to admit it, I do quite enjoy a rom-com. But this was one where it was just like kind of late on Saturday. I just wanted something to, kind of put on that was like easy to watch or whatever. And, I'd seen that this had got positive reviews. And again, it was like a very, charming film. And it's kind of got this, the basic kind of rom-com premise where, these two people meet. There's the standard conflict where they have like a one-night stand. And then there's like this miscommunication as to sort of what happens during the one night stand or whatever. They go their separate ways, but then they're brought back together because the guy's friend is getting married, and he's getting married to the girl's sister. So they're at this wedding, they're in a destination or whatever, and they're of course forced to interact. And as you kind of know, the movie kind of like starts to pair them together. They go through the standard trials and tribulations, and they eventually end up together. And it turns out I'm a little bit of a sucker for that. I actually was watching it, and I actually watched it in two parts. So I watched it Saturday night. I fell asleep, and the sign of a good movie is that I was actually looking forward to watching the rest of it. So it was Monday, just before I went to football. I was like, I'm going to put the rest of this film come on, and it was great. Everyone does a really good job in it.
Yeah, it seems like there have been a few of these, but they're all really cheap Netflix productions. Mm-hmm. They pop up in my recommendations every once in a while, and they all look terrible and really generic and really, really milquetoast. And I guess this one isn't.
This one you would probably say it's probably generic and probably milquetoast as well. It's very probably on the nose with like some of this comedy and stuff like that as well. And it goes through all like the regular beats that a rom-com does as well. I mean, I wouldn't probably say that it's like the most amazing rom-com that's been ever made. It's like it's no Notebook or anything like that, but it's just a really solid movie. Like if you're just looking for something that's quite light and quite fun to watch and easy, then this is a good movie to put on.
Yeah, sometimes all you really need is likable people doing stuff. Like sometimes that's all a movie needs, and I guess this one delivers.
Yeah, 100%. That's mine. And Dan?
So I watched Underwater, which is a 2020 sci-fi horror movie, so very similar to yours. It's basically it's set on this deep sea mining rig that in the first minute of the movie essentially experiences like this severe disaster, which means it has to be evacuated. And it basically follows this engineer who is among the few survivors who basically move through the rubble and essentially try to get to the escape pods. And that's basically the movie. And in doing so, they start getting small clues what actually happened, because this is not supposed to be able to happen. This is a massive complex. It's not like even an earthquake is not supposed to take it down, but it basically just from 1 minute to the next just kind of fell apart. And it's a very simple story. It's a very direct story, but it does atmosphere well. It does the action set pieces well. It gets a lot from Alien in terms of how it looks and feels. And it's just enjoyable, and it just works. And I kept waiting for it to get stupid, and it just never did. And that was a really pleasant surprise. There are a couple of platitudes sprinkled in, like, "Oh, we were never supposed to be here, and this is nature fighting back," but that's like 2 lines. And the reason I kept waiting for this stuff is because a lot of stories like this recently have had this like anti-technology, anti-progress attitude. Did you see The Rig? Like, it was a mini-series like 6 months ago.
No, I didn't see that, no.
It's kind of similar in that it's set on an oil rig off the coast of Scotland, and then this severe storm shows up, and everything is shrouded in fog, and none of the rescue boats can get to the mining platform, like the oil platform, and basically the scientists and engineers and workers and like the white collar types are all stuck, like, that work for this company are all stuck on this platform, and then weird stuff starts happening. And it starts off really well, and I've seen other stories like this that are really interesting and atmospheric. And then about 4 episodes in, they start breaking out the militant environmentalism, kind of like, this is nature fighting back, and we should never have been here, and this is human hubris, and all of this nonsense. And I really hate it when shows kind of turn the tables on you halfway through, where they lure you in with one type of story, and then halfway through they say, gotcha, now you have to listen to our speech.
Yeah.
And it's fine if you start off with, like, this is the kind of story we want to do. And anybody who's up for that can go along that ride. But a lot of stories kind of lie to you what they're about. And with Underwater, I always kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, because surely there has to be something coming in the second half, right? And just didn't. It's just a couple of smart professional people trying to survive in weird and extreme circumstances. And I enjoyed myself thoroughly the entire time.
Yeah,
and it's a really small movie. It got very little attention when it came out. I think it came out right into COVID, so nobody saw it. And like, I've seen it kind of cautiously recommended in some places, but it's a lot better than you might think based on its reputation.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask that, but I completely forgot about COVID, because I was going to say 2020 is quite recent, and I didn't really hear any much on the conversation about it. And I was going to say, did it come out in cinema? But most likely it probably didn't, I'd say.
If it did, but if it did, it made no money. So box office, actually 41 million, so not too bad.
Not too bad.
But it still lost quite a bit of money, and it probably should have been much cheaper than that. But yeah, just as a movie that, like, I found it randomly on streaming, it's quite enjoyable, and it's not like in terms of feel, it's a lot in the 80s science fiction corner, but not quite as good as those. But in terms of general feel, it's in that direction.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, because you mentioned action in there, like, what kind of action are we getting? Because when you first introduced it, I thought it was like, kind of like a survival movie, like 127 days, or like The Martian, or something along those lines.
Yeah, so there's a lot of underwater stuff, people trying to get from A to B without running out of air. There's injuries, and there are monsters that are a factor as well, and saying more than that would be probably too much spoiler. But it's not like an action, like, nobody breaks out the guns and starts, like, it's not that kind of action movie, but it's more of a survival movie than anything else.
Okay, yeah, because that's how I pictured it when you first introduced it. But then you mentioned the action, I was like, oh, okay, maybe does it take a turn or whatever? But no.
There's stuff like having to get to the place with like, there's a scene where somebody's oxygen scrubber malfunctions, and they've got like 3 minutes of air left, but it's 5 minutes to the airlock, and it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're all engineers and scientists, so they kind of get inventive and repurpose gear and that sort of thing. So it's a lot. It's more survival than anything.
Yeah. No.
So, cool. but thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah. No. It sounds very interesting. It sounds definitely like something that I really enjoy watching. Especially as you said, you've got that kind of like the investigative side of things as well, where they're kind of like uncovering what actually sort of happened in to the oil rig. So yeah, no, cool.
Yeah, it's not really an investigation. It's more like you start getting puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Throughout the movie, and it kind of starts forming a picture at some point. Yeah. But you start off knowing nothing at all. But together with the protagonist, you start piecing things together.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. Thank you very much. And on that note, Shogun, the main event, what we're here to talk about. Do you want to give us your thoughts?
So I was actually kind of dreading this episode a little bit, because I have very little to say. I have very few complaints. It's just thoroughly enjoyable. Like, over the past couple of years, I've been so conditioned to like pick apart stories and find all the ways in which they don't work or what that were done wrong or whatever, or where the production was a mess in some way. And this just isn't. This is just a solid, well-told, high-quality story, thoroughly well-acted, high production values. Writing is great. Production values are top-notch. It's been compared to Game of Thrones, and it's definitely in that. Like it's definitely got vibes similar to early Game of Thrones and also HBO's Rome and all of these stories. Like in the like pantheon of historical dramas, especially the political ones. I think this is top tier, unless they really mess it up in the second half, which I don't expect. Like this is just thoroughly excellent.
Cool. I mean, I think I agree with you. It's definitely a solid show. The only thing I would say is I don't feel like I've been gripped by the show in terms of like wanting to go back and watch all of it. And I have no complaints about any of it. And if I when I do watch the rest of it, I will watch it and I won't regret watching it. But I don't feel like I've been completely gripped by the show yet, even though I do enjoy everything about the show. Again, like you mentioned, there's all kind of like the kind of like political scheming. You've got the main character. I forget the actor's name, but anytime I see him in anything, he's always top tier. But obviously you got him in a setting where he's kind of a prisoner in Osaka, but he still kind of has a little bit of freedom whilst they vote on what to do with him essentially. And just kind of how he is kind of like masterminding and trying to like survive with the rest of his clan and stuff like that is like all very, very interesting. Who's the main character, the white guy?
John Blackthorne.
John Blackthorne. He's hilarious. He's unintentionally hilarious. Every time he speaks, every time he's like, having that language barrier with the Japanese. Anytime he's just kind of like just being brash and just being rude and just calling them savages and stuff like that, he says it in the most unintentionally funny way. And like him, I'm very on board with him. He's super hilarious. But
he gets like a lot of good lines, and they get a lot of mileage out of the idea that nobody can understand him except for his translator, who is too polite to translate what he's saying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there's a couple of scenes where I said, I can empathize.
Yeah,
with where he's at this point.
Yeah, no, definitely. But yeah, no, I feel like there's potential for it to get a lot better as well. I know that I don't think we've had too many action scenes so far. I've only watched up until episode 3, and actually towards the end of episode 3 there was some action set pieces in there as well, but I feel like there's probably a lot more to come in that department as well.
It starts to heat up in episode 4. So at the time we're recording, 4 of the episodes are available on streaming. Episode 5 came out today and we haven't had time to watch it, so this is basically a review of the first half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for you
just to lay out all the cards. We're reviewing the entire story.
Yeah. But yeah, no, like I feel like probably the most interesting part is, you've got this power vacuum where obviously the previous shogun, I believe it was, or whatever it was, has died, and you've got all these different kind of parties not making a play, but you can sense that there's like a little bit of tension there. Maybe people have their own like desires, people have their own kind of things that they want out of it. They're having to like even with like the Portuguese that were in here, they're having to like work together, but they all have like their own hidden agendas from each other, and it's just kind of like really interesting seeing how that's playing out at the moment in the show.
Yeah, like I think they're doing a good job making the political landscape understandable, because having 5 different warlords it's easy to get them confused.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you don't like. I personally don't have a lot of reference points for that era in Japan. Always kind of a fan of Japanese history, but I don't know enough to really know what's going on in this, other than what the show is telling me. But yeah, I think it does a decent job under laying, especially in the first 4 episodes, just laying out the stakes and the situations. And there are some great scenes where John starts to understand and kind of sees the stakes and sees the consequences of actions.
Mhm.
I think we can probably get into one or two of those. But oftentimes these stories kind of like use kind of the point of view character, like the fish out of water character, as a crutch. But here it's used, I think, really effectively, where because everything has to be explained to him, you don't have this problem that last week I mentioned in House of the Dragon, where people are explaining the rules of their society to each other.
Yeah.
Because there's no point of view, like there's no character who needs things explained to them, but somebody has to explain for the benefit of the audience. And here, like this is an example of why like points like these fish out of water characters are used so often, and I think it works really well here.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like you said, it really helps kind of like set the land and sets, people's position in the world and stuff like that as well. Yeah, no, I agree.
Actually, but you mentioned John Blackthorne. I actually thought his performance, was the only weak point in the entire thing, because he kind of is always growling, is always using the same tone, like regardless of circumstance. And maybe that changes in the second half a little bit, but in the beginning, he's always angry. He's always snarling at somebody, like regardless of context. And I think there were scenes where a different tone had been justified. And everybody else is obviously very formal, very, very reserved.
Yeah.
Because of all of this is like every other character is Japanese nobility, basically, with the exception of the Portuguese characters. But he's kind of the one person who really can show emotion, at least in an overt way. But he's always stuck in annoyed, belligerent mode. And I thought that was a little bit of a shame.
Well, I feel there are parts where it's over the top. And if we're in the spoiler section, I feel like when is it Yoshida's character is getting away, and he's like preventing them from like looking into the box because he's saying you have to protect women's purity and stuff like that. I feel like that was probably a little bit over the top.
I actually like that scene in terms of what he was doing. I was mostly talking about like when he's in private and he's talking with Mariko, for example, or with his consort. I forgot her name. Who's kind of his assigned wife. I don't
think I'm there yet. Where he has
episode 3. Has he been given his house yet? Where you are?
No, has he been given?
It's episode 4. There's some cool scenes on that coming up because he basically gets into the employ of Toranaga, and as part of that is he basically gets an estate. Right, that's basically what happens, and then that kind of change like forces him to be like to function in Japanese domestic culture as opposed to the formal. Like it puts him into a different context where he then has to learn the rules all over again. So there's some cool stuff coming there. But there are a few scenes I thought where like a different tone. Like at some point he should get used to a situation. Like in the first episode or two, I understand that he's under constant stress and he's, afraid of being killed at any moment, and he's angry, he's reserved, he's tired, and all of that. But at some point, maybe he should have mellowed out a little bit.
I mean, I'm only on episode 3, and to be honest, I feel like it kind of like helps paint him as a complete, different culture to sort of the rest in terms of like his like brashness, especially when you're kind of comparing it to like the Japanese culture where there's like a lot of like rules and traditions, and you like mentioned there, but like the nobility and stuff like that. And then you've got this like, kind of like really like loud sound that's just kind of like coming in and just like, kind of like wrecking the place and, just being like really brash. And it just kind of helps show the two different cultures. And I can understand what you're saying where it might, get a little bit annoying, but for me it hasn't. For me, it's kind of worked for his character so far, in terms of like, again, he's constantly repeating about not wanting to die in that place, and being really against sort of like the foreigners and stuff like that. And this is a man that got he's got conflict with the Portuguese. He's come from England have conflict with the Portuguese, so he's kind of like
surrounded by enemies. That part makes sense.
Yeah, so that him being sort of constantly brash and sort of constantly on edge around people, I've kind of it hasn't not worked for me yet. And then again, I'm only on episode 3 so far.
Yeah, but I think that's my one complaint about the performances. Like if anything, everybody else is maybe like everybody else doesn't have much opportunity to do things, right? It's all by the nature of the roles and the characters requires that it's very stilted and formal and very like not their own voice. Right, but I actually thought there's a bunch of scenes where that actually shines through, where like little glimpses of humanity kind of come through, where people kind of feel free to talk to him because he's not part of the system.
Yeah.
Like in small ways, like there isn't really that big a scene, or like a big moment like that. There's just lots of small moments where people gradually, like a few people, especially Mariko, slowly open up to him.
Yeah, no, I agree. Another thing I actually thought was actually really well done was when he first meets Toranagu. And it kind of like I feel like just like the scene in general where like it starts off like you've got him, the translator, and Toranagu, and they're kind of like communicating back and forth through the translator, and then you can just kind of like slowly shift it. They slowly shift it away from the translator, and it's just like them having a conversation as it gets a little bit more intense. And I felt like that scene, that one.
That's a great scene. Like that scene could have been easily been varied by the numbers, but no, it's actually quite tense.
Yeah, and as like the conversation is like tensing up, you're kind of like sort of silencing the translator. You're having them speak directly to each other. And I felt like honestly when I was watching that, I was like, this is so good. This is excellently done.
Yeah, and also when the translator's around, they never translate 100%.
No.
Like there's always little editorializing going on, even when they insist they don't.
Yeah.
Just very small choices of words. Like at one point, Mariko changes war to conflict or something. Like really small things, but they kind of add up to kind of shaping the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's all deliberate, right? Like there's no autopilot writing in this. It's all very deliberate.
No. And again, with to praise the writing as well, it's like, things aren't happening because the plot needs it to happen. It feels like everything that's kind of been happening so far is just like what naturally probably would happen, how certain things would, naturally kind of progress in this story, with all the, things that the characters are doing, all the sort of decisions that they're making and things like that. It just feels like, they're not putting specific scenes in there just for the sake of putting scenes in there, essentially. Apart from when the Spanish ship pilot drops into the water and they have to go save him. That's the only part where I was like, okay, this maybe feels.
But that has several important roles, right? Because that is where he begins to understand Japanese honor culture.
Yeah.
Right. He at several points, right, where he says, like he just outright says to the nobleman, he basically challenges him to rescue the guy.
Yeah.
Because he realizes that he can't turn down a challenge or he can't appear weak.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he's at the slightest problem, he immediately goes towards suicide, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't try that hard to get out of the water. He just, and so that scene may have been like maybe not have been strictly necessary, but that is basically John's first glimpse into what this culture is like.
Yeah.
Like how people behave under stress when they're not in control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, all of that context, yeah. It definitely works in terms of like helping shape John as a character and helping him sort of kind of like, again, start to get used to this sort of Japanese culture and stuff like that. It just felt like, with like TV shows where, you have an episode and there has to be like some type of like conflict or something has to go wrong. It was just like that scenario before, all of that happened before, sort of where the guy has to go save him and stuff like that. That's just kind of how it felt a little bit to me. But again, everything around it is, again, really well done.
Yeah, there's basically very little filler, and it's all very linear and all builds on each other.
Yeah.
Like there was very little where I was bored or where I didn't know what was going on or I didn't understand why this was happening. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I have that in shows where it's not immediately apparent what's happening, and if I don't have a destination, like if I don't have a marker to look for, I tend to get distracted easily. Mm-hmm. And in this show, it was always clear what was going on and why and where it was heading. So I enjoyed it on that level.
Yeah. No, definitely looking forward to kind of seeing where the story continues here, because I mean I've left off in a quite an interesting place. Obviously, you've watched the episode after that I've watched, but where you have Toranagu, who's just escaped Osaka on the ship, and he's just made a deal with the Portuguese priest as well. So it's shaping up to sort of be quite interesting. I don't know how many episodes we're getting out of this.
Total.
Episodes. Okay, so we're 3. Well, I'm 3 out of 10. Into the season. So yeah, no, really looking forward to seeing how this progresses.
Yeah. One thing that didn't really make sense to me as I was watching it was the whole thing with the blockade and the Portuguese. So the rival clan is blocking the exit from the bay, right? So they can't escape.
Yeah.
And then the Portuguese say, yeah, we'll run the blockade in exchange for this ridiculous price.
Yeah.
And then John kind of just goes on a boat and they follow him and he kind of tricks them into sinking the blockade.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I missed a scene. Did you follow that? Why that was happening?
I might have missed a scene there as well. I didn't completely. Yeah, no, I might have missed a scene there as well.
Yeah, that was the only time where I didn't follow. I didn't really understand what the stakes were and what people were trying to do.
I mean, I know for John's character, they in the negotiation they chose to he had to be left behind and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I obviously understand
I didn't understand what his plan was and why he didn't do that from the start, because it seemed to just involve rowing directly at the blockade, which they were going to do anyway. So I'm sure I'm missing something. I just don't know what. As
in why John didn't do it? Why they didn't do it at first without doing the negotiation?
Yeah.
Oh, because they needed a bigger ship. Because in there they say about the ship that they're on. If they go at the blockade, the men will board it and they'll be able to sink the ship that they're on. So they have to go and get the other ship, the black.
So he just needed to goad the Portuguese into chasing him.
Sorry.
So he just needed to goad the Portuguese into chasing him.
No, so he was meant to go with them. He was meant to go with them on this sort of black flag ship. He was meant to go with them on this boat, and they were meant to go past the blockade. But as part of the negotiations with the Portuguese, obviously they've asked for the church, they've asked for this, that, and the other, but they've said you have to leave him behind. Like, he's the enemy. They give Toranagu the book of I think it's his diary or something like that, or his note, whatever. And in that,
like a logbook, yeah.
Like a logbook, and they're saying he's a dangerous man. He's not who he says he is. He's not a merchant. He's a pirate. You have to leave him behind. So as part of it, they're like, okay, no, you need to return back to that ship. But obviously, he's very determined to not die in Osaka. So he's like, you're gonna go, but I'm gonna follow you behind. And because I've got a smaller ship, we can go faster than you. So as you're going at this blockade, we're also gonna go at this blockade, so that they're gonna sink. We're going to use your ship's momentum to sink the blockade, and then we're gonna make it with you.
Okay. Yeah, still doesn't quite add up in my head, but yeah, that was the only time where I thought it wasn't clear.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense because obviously the Portuguese, Catholic Protestant, the Catholic Protestant.
But they're Catholics.
Sorry.
They are the Catholics.
Yeah, and then obviously John's a Protestant, and that's why they have that the whole war between England and Portugal. So they're again part of their scheme, and part of what they're trying to do on their side is they don't want this man around. They he's essentially the enemy, and they can't outright just kill him. They can't outright just get rid of him. And especially in the episode before, well, I think in the episode before they tried to assassinate him, or someone sends an assassin to go and kill kill John. So they're clearly trying to get rid of him, and they're not going to be able to ask Toranagu to outright just kill him there and then. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what else can we say about Shogun? Favorite moment so far? Would you say? What would you say?
So this is episode 4, which you haven't seen yet.
Spoilers.
But essentially, you remember the jerk governor from the first episode that takes them prisoner in the fishing village. Basically, that guy shows up at Blackthorn's mansion to confiscate his guns, and he basically says, you're not getting my guns. And then his consort says, why don't I keep them as a third party? And then John gives the guns to the consort, and then the governor orders the consort to hand over the guns, essentially saying, I outrank you, I'm higher standing than you, give me the guns. And then she puts a gun on him and says to please leave. And it's a very tense scene. It's like the first time somebody takes John's side when it doesn't benefit them.
Okay.
Right. So that's a really, really intense scene, and it's very short. And there's another scene related to the guns that is also really good. But that's coming in the next episode. I also really like the scene where they're trying to smuggle Toranaga out of, is it Osaka? Like in the what's the term? Like in those carriages that are meant to be for the wives.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the rival lord calls their bluff and wants to inspect. I forget. Remember what they're called? Like they say it, but I forget. But basically, he wants to inspect them, right? And he would find Toranaga, and John is the only person who can stop them. And in real time, he kind of works his way through. Okay, this is what's happening, and this is why nobody can stop them, but I can. So I'm gonna throw a tantrum as the loud foreigner. And that is like, I thought that was a really like, having lived in foreign countries, there's this very precarious situation where you're not really an equal, but you have certain freedoms that other people don't because you're not really part of that system. And this is like an extreme version of that, right? Where you're allowed to do certain things that locals wouldn't get away with, and this is like an extreme version of that. I thought that entire scene was really tense, where he just really hams it up and really like throws a tantrum and really makes a scene, and everybody like counting on the fact that everybody around him is too embarrassed to do anything about it. I thought that was a thoroughly enjoyable scene.
See, that was the one we mentioned before, where I was like, I understand it, but it just felt a little bit over the top. But
that's the point. But that's the point.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
Like, he's really exploiting the fact that like he is able to, like, that the rules don't apply to him and nobody else could do this.
Yeah.
And that also means that there's no mechanism for anybody to stop him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
And it's not just that; it's also the moment of realization where he, like, in real time figures out what's going on, formulates a plan, and carries it out.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that scene.
Yeah. I feel like the whole setup leading towards that as well was, like, quite interesting, where, no one really knows what, Toraganu's plan is until it's, actually unfolding. They're not having to spell it out for you. They're just kind of like hoping that you can kind of follow along and see what's going on. And I felt like everything around it, like the whole setup of it was, really good. Again, I feel like I'll stick with. I understand why he needed to be over the top, but I was just kind of I was cringing a little bit during that scene. It just felt a little bit maybe too over the top for my liking.
Yeah. I mean, again, you're supposed to be embarrassed for on his behalf, right?
Yeah.
So I guess job done.
Yeah, I was gonna say job done. It literally did everything that it needed to. Maybe I'm a noble Japanese in another life.
Another thing I quite liked is that it's not as nearly as sanitized as it could be. Like how the Protestants and the Catholics just outright hate each other, and how the Japanese view everybody else as barbarians, and like these are like broad ideas that are period appropriate, and these are not people who think like 21st century people.
No.
And I think if you really, really tried, you could probably push this further, but it didn't feel like I was watching 21st century people dressed, in period pieces.
No.
Like in period costumes.
Yeah, and that's why I felt like everything that was coming out of John Mouse was hilarious, because he was just like outright just calling them like savages and dogs and this, that, and the other. Like
at one time, which is so obscure that it doesn't even register as a slur anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So and I honestly like thrown a little bit because I didn't expect it.
Yeah.
Because nobody has used that term unironically probably for 40 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very like that would be the main division between them, right? Like as far as the Japanese are concerned, they're all Europeans, but actually no, there's a huge gap between being a Portuguese and being English in that time and place.
And I feel like what helped as well, one thing I read about the show kind of before watching it was, I believe it's Yoshida, Toranaga's character. The only way that he was gonna get onto the show was if it was sort of accurate to what Japanese was like, because obviously he's Japanese himself, was if it was accurate to that time period, and if they'd got, Japanese actors for those roles and, didn't, kind of fill them with, character actors from, maybe some of the different Asian countries as well. So I feel like that probably helps with it feeling like it belongs in that time period as well, is having that, that authenticity and some of the actors, and sort of, having someone there that, actually cares and, wants to make sure that things are done correctly.
Yeah, and apparently they're speaking period accurate Japanese as well. That it's not modern day Japanese. I have no way of confirming this, but apparently this is the case.
Yeah.
So that's really, so they have to coach the Japanese actors to speak in the proper dialect. Which, that's a level of detail that, like, even if I can't appreciate it, I still enjoy and still respect.
Yeah, no, respect massively to actually, as someone that's, speaks English, to then be taught how to speak English in like a set period of time. Yeah.
Right. There was this show, I think it's called Barbarians or something, where it's set up, it's like a Roman governor in Germania. During the Roman era, and the Romans are speaking period accurate Latin, and the Germans are speaking modern day German, and to me as a German speaker it sounds very weird. Because I can understand, like, they apparently went to this massive effort into making it not just Latin, but like the Latin dialect that the Romans spoke. But the Germans are just 21st century Germans.
I can imagine it probably took you out the show a little bit.
Yeah, and I imagine it even does if you don't speak German, because it just sounds modern.
Yeah.
And then we had like Napoleon, where they didn't have French accents, for example. And there was some debate about whether that counts against the movie or whether it's about the story and the performances as opposed to feeling French. But yeah, in my view, with like historical stories, the point is to be historical. It's supposed to transport you into, like, as they say, the past is a strange place. Like, the past is a different world than the one we live in, right? Even if humans are the same everywhere, like different times and places, just like this, society is different, life is different, ideas are different, and I think if you're gonna set it in a different era, in a particular place, it should feel like that place.
Otherwise, don't do it. Why would you make a Napoleon movie if you didn't want to be historically accurate to the time? Why don't you just get the story that you want to tell and just tell it in a different setting, essentially?
Yeah, and it's like this, like there's this huge fad at the moment where people apparently want to be as unhistorically accurate as possible, in various ways. Like Napoleon is one of them, and there's others too. To the point where many people even say, like, it's a nitpick to ask for historical accuracy in a historical movie, and I don't get it. Like, what's the point?
Honestly,
if you want to watch modern people do modern things, there's a million shows and movies that do that. Like watch something set in modern day London or New York or whatever. If you want that, but there's if you tune in for a show about 17th century Japan, don't you want it to feel like 17th century Japan?
You would want to, yeah. It's like watching a war movie and it feels like it's the 21st century. It feels like you're in 2024 and you're watching a movie set in World War II. It just wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. And like everybody has like a breaking point, right? If you watch a movie set in World War II and then they break out a smartphone, or the plot relies on the internet, I think almost everybody would call foul on that. So everybody has a line somewhere, but for some reason, there's seemingly there seems to be a trend towards making everything as modern as possible. And then this show comes along and even uses archaic dialects. It's like, I just enjoy the show more, and there's more. The show is more interesting to me if it gives at least somewhat authentic picture of what that time was like.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I didn't even know that about like the whole Japanese dialect and stuff like that. But it adds, it just gives it a little bit more it just gives you a better feeling about the show. I don't know, I'm trying to find a better words to say there, but it just elevates the show a little bit more, in my opinion.
Which makes it even weirder that they invented characters for this, but they're all characters that match one-to-one to historical characters. So it's not like John Blackthorne didn't exist, but he's based on somebody called William Adams, who basically had the same life as depicted here.
Yeah.
But why change? Like, this is something that happens in the book, right? And this, it's like, it's a holdover from the book, right?
Yeah.
So this is not this show that made that decision. I'm just wondering why, like, what the point is. If like, I understand if it's like a composite character, like where you say, okay, there were like 50 English people in Japan in that era, and this is like the synthesis of all their lives in one person. Right? Movies do this all the time. I'm still not entirely convinced that it's actually necessary, but it's fine, right? It's a storytelling device, right? But if it's supposed to be a specific person, why change his name? I don't understand that.
Yeah, that one I can't understand. And maybe there's an explanation for it somewhere out there. That one I don't understand. Maybe it's, again, it's like Japanese culture. I don't know whether it's like maybe a Japanese culture thing where it's maybe, to pay respect or something like that.
I don't think so. This was a decision made by the author of the original book.
Okay.
And this is not a modern day thing for for current sensibilities. This was a decision made in what was the 70s or whenever this book was written.
Yeah.
And like sometimes this works, right? Like I watched Chernobyl recently.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a character there that's basically a scientist that performs certain functions in the plot. And that character is like a composite of 50 people who did things like this. But for the purposes of a show, showing one person doing these things is much easier than showing 50 people, and the audience has to keep them separate and has to understand how they all fit in, and there's a lot of logistics involved. And so, for practical purposes, it makes sense to condense that into fewer people. And almost every show does this, every historical show. But again, this is not what's happening here, right? This is a one-to-one mapping to a specific character, like whose life is known. So yeah. That one's a little bit weird to me.
Yeah, bit of a mystery. I think that one.
And in general, like this show, like there's this distinct. Are you familiar with this distinction between historical accuracy and historical authenticity? So
Yep.
The idea is basically historical accuracy is you depict what happened the way it happened as accurately as possible, down to the details. And historical authenticity is you tell a new story, but all the pieces are authentic to the era you're describing. So how people talk, how they behave, what they believe, how the rules of the society, that's all authentic to that era, but the specific people and actions are fictional.
Mm-hmm.
And this is apparently what this is doing. Like, even though it's specifically referring to individual people, this is how they approach it. And I think that's a totally valid approach. And the HBO series Rome did the same thing. It depicts characters that didn't exist for the most part, except for the really big names, but all the details are accurate to the period. Mm-hmm. And they use that to construct new characters. It kind of, it's a little bit like, it doesn't quite fit with the approach to talk about a specific real person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't completely take away too much. I believe from the show, it doesn't take away too much. It's kind of like a bit of a name swap. Yeah, I don't know. It's just all a bit of a mystery, like without actually understanding, why it was done in the first instance. It's quite difficult to kind of comment on it. It's just.
They do it with everybody. It's not just this one guy. It's like all of the characters are based on somebody else.
Yeah. So it's really hard to say why they would do it. Again, like, the first thing that would pop out is you'd think it's like a cultural thing, but maybe it's not.
Apparently William Adams is like revered in Japan. Like, there's shrines to him and stuff.
Okay. Oh, really?
Like, he's not vilified, apparently.
Oh,
like,
really?
Based on what I've read. Like, nobody is embarrassed about him. Nobody, like, he's not hated or anything.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a part, like, that's, and then there's like 20 people or something that kind of were like him, as in foreigners that came to Japan from various countries, both in Asia and in Europe, and then essentially integrated into Japanese society and reached very high levels.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to be hated in modern Japan, based on what I've read. Like, nobody's torn down like their graves or anything like that. Like, you can go to like William Adams' grave, and there's a plaque commemorating him. It's somewhere in Japan.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, actually. That's quite interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, so I found it interesting how this whole this entire show is like a refutation of like the attitude of everybody who's currently making historical fiction. It's everybody's celebrating it for it, but I haven't seen anybody really make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I'm just reading into it, but like it seems to be kind of like proving all of these arguments wrong about how historical accuracy doesn't matter, doesn't make for better stories, just only distracts from the storytelling, doesn't fit with modern sensibilities. Like all of these arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Shogun does the opposite, and everybody loves it.
I mean, I've not seen too many of the reviews for Shogun and like what people actually say about it. I know that for a period
it's
of
got
time,
like 100 on Rotten Tomatoes.
I was gonna say like it's had 100%. I don't know whether it still has 100%. As
maybe not, but like
maybe it's been like really it's been really well received. I don't know what like the specifics people have said about it because I've not really like watched any reviews or read any of the like Rotten Tomato reviews or anything like that. To kind of especially to compare it to Napoleon, where I didn't watch it, but I heard a lot of the conversation around it was and a lot of what the director was comments were about it. But
maybe it's because Japanese history is not as politicized, because there's lots of Japanese voices out there, right, who will present Japanese history on their own terms, right, and nobody can stop them. Yeah. But if you're talking about African culture, that's a little bit slightly different. You know what I mean, right? Like a lot of the big what's the word? Controversies in recent years about historical fiction have been about African history. Like there's various Cleopatra stories and whatever else, right?
Yeah.
And there's this big cultural tug of war about who gets to tell, African stories.
Yeah.
Anybody but Africans, apparently. Like that's just different factions of Westerners fighting over who gets to tell African stories.
Yeah.
And the same thing isn't clearly happening with Japan. So maybe this is not controversial because it's Japan.
Maybe not, but I mean, you did have quite heavy Japanese influence on this, to be honest, and a lot of guidance to it.
But nobody's trying to co-opt it. Is my point. Whenever anybody makes a Cleopatra story, everybody's fighting over who gets to co-opt it for their own purposes.
Yeah.
And one more historically inaccurate than the next. And nobody's trying this with Japanese culture because, you have to kind of fight. Like there are Japanese voices who care about being represented and have their weight to throw around.
Yeah.
So I just found it interesting that they like the entire fight that normally happens every time. This happens with Napoleon too, right? This is not just about Africa. This is also like Napoleon, like Ridley Scott kind of used his position of influence to trash talk one of the fundamental figures of French identity and history. Mm-hmm. And he did it really belligerently and really gleefully. Mm-hmm. And he did it because he's this legendary director who can do whatever he wants. And, the only people who seem to have cared or who have protested are like French literary critics.
But do you feel
so it's not just confined to African history, it's also other places.
No, but do you feel like, again, you said that there wasn't too much like fair about this. Do you feel like it's because it's being told by a Japanese voice, or it's got enough like Japanese influence in the creation of it, whereas like something like when you're talking about things like Cleopatra, or when you're talking about things like Napoleon and stuff like that, it's like it's not really being like is Ridley Scott a French person who's loves French history and wanted to tell historically accurate the Napoleon story? Probably not. Are the people that are making Cleopatra? I don't even. Is Cleopatra Egyptian? Is she not?
Greek.
Oh, is she Greek? Okay.
She came from a Greek dynasty that ruled Egypt for a while.
Okay.
So she's not even African in any way of the word.
Well, no, yeah, but she seems to be very revered in African culture, it seems. But again,
she's one of I'm actually not so sure about that. Like, huh? I just think she's one of the biggest African rulers that are known in the West.
Yeah.
That's why people care.
Yeah.
And it's also notable that whenever somebody tries to tell a Cleopatra story, the last people who are asked are the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think, like, it's not like like I think isn't Denis Villeneuve supposed to make a Cleopatra, or was at least considering making a Cleopatra movie? And there was one a few years ago, and or like I think one was made, and then a few days later it was announced, and then got cancelled.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact details, but there's no Egyptian to be seen.
No.
No Egyptian historians, no Egyptian filmmakers.
I feel like part of it as well is that there isn't enough. What's the best way to, not voices, but like, and not clout, but there isn't enough like present or like authority over the ownership of it. You know, from like when you're saying like,
it should be pretty clear that if you are talking about a famous Egyptian dynasty,
yeah,
you work with the Egyptians, like Egyptian historians and so on.
But like my thing is like the people that are creating the stories are like, we don't have to, basically. Whereas where it's a Japanese and you want to get a Japanese actor, and it's, you know, Yoshida, and he has a bit more of a sort of, you know, authoritative sort of, you know, hand on the project. Whereas with Cleopatra, they might get someone that isn't Greek or isn't Egyptian, but might, you know, potentially look the part. So, you know, they're not essentially.
It's like everybody focuses on the actors, but I'm talking about writers and directors and.
Yeah, but that as well. But that as well is that they don't feel that they need to. They don't feel like they have to. And, you know, even if there is a few like dissenting voices and things like that, they don't feel like, you know, or for Cleopatra's, you know, sake, they don't feel like there's enough authority in the Egyptian voice to really care about, you know, wanting to sort of have them contribute to it. It's like, you know, we can own this IP, we can create this, and there's not really much you can, you know, really say or do about it. Whereas I feel like the Japanese, because of, you know, their culture and because of sort of how much
Egypt has no soft power and Japan has a lot.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Geopolitics. It's all geopolitics, basically. Yeah. I was trying to find a soft way of saying it, but we kind of got there.
Yeah. So, and I just found it interesting because like that comes up like with Netflix, especially like they're making various documentaries about especially African rulers.
Yeah.
And they've all like, according to people who know the history, it's all nonsense.
Yeah.
But it's politically motivated nonsense, right? And like this didn't even come up in Shogun.
Yeah.
Even though it's a story written by like I think an English guy.
Yeah.
It's not even a Japanese story.
No. But I feel like that's probably why you get a lot of like dissenting voices as well within, you know, especially when you're saying about like the shows about like the African rulers, is that especially as an African, it feels like, you know, for a long time, you know, people go and they take and they, you know, they keep taking from Africa without really giving anything back or without, you know, really sort of, you know, helping out the people there. So even if, you know, you're getting these shows about like these African rulers, are they getting the right people in place, or are they, you know, even employing sort of, you know, people from that country to be in those positions? Because you'll have something like Will Smith in what's the movie where he plays an African doctor, plays like a Nigerian doctor, and he absolutely butchers the Nigerian accent in the movie. But, you know, you're not actually getting people from that culture to represent the people themselves. You're just getting whoever's kind of hot, or, you know, whatever actor that you can have access to in whatever country. So I feel like
I couldn't tell if he's authentically Nigerian. No idea.
Oh yeah, no, you yeah. As someone that's like African or whatever, and that's, you know, heard it enough times, you know, you can quite easily pick up on these things. And it's just, I feel like that's probably why you get a lot of dissenting voices, especially on things like Twitter and stuff like that. People,
but, you know, in fairness, with like the African rulers, it's, you know, often black filmmakers who are doing the co-opting.
Yeah.
It's just a different part of Africa they're co-opting.
Yeah.
And they're basically just asserting ownership over the entire thing. And that's one of the things that's kind of weirdly ironic about especially the Cleopatra debate. Mm-hmm. Like there's like a difference between sub-Saharan Africa and Mediterranean Africa, right? In terms of culture, history, everything.
Everything, yeah.
But that whole thing just gets paved over, and it's just all Africa.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is the exact opposite of what these people are arguing for, at least officially. Mm-hmm. So I just, as somebody who has no real stakes other than somebody who likes history and would like to hear these stories, like I've heard since then like stories from some Madagascan rulers that are really, there was this mad queen of Madagascar who was completely, like this, it's this fantastic story. And like nobody's ever made a movie about her.
No.
And I honestly can't even remember the name because Madagascan names are like, they make Indian names look easy. But, you know, point is, like this whole thing is this convoluted mess and this big shouting match, and then Shogun comes along and just does a thing. Mm-hmm. And I found that really refreshing. Especially like just months after Napoleon as well, where that entire argument was reheated, warmed over again.
Yeah, and that could potentially be why people took Shogun a lot more as well. Is that you just had the recent Napoleon, which everyone was like kind of like arguing against, and how it wasn't historically accurate and stuff like that. And then you get something like this, and it's a good story as well. It's a good story,
and also honestly, it feels like watching something about the Roman Empire. Like nobody politicizes the Roman Empire.
No.
Like you can just make a story about Caesar and you can just do what you want. And here it's the same.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's what historical fiction should be. It should be as close in spirit and detail as much as possible. And then you within those confines you find a story to tell.
Yeah.
And for some reason that's a tall ask for many people apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, that's like this is what my problem is with like certain things as well, is that like the first thing you always want to have is a good story, and then you then have to find the setting to tell that story. And if you're going to find a setting, one, it has to sort of fit in within the story that you want to tell. And a lot of stories are sort of kind of the same thing. You might have like a revenge story, you might have like a romance story, whatever. But if you're going to tell it in a specific period, do it for a reason and be as accurate as possible to that. So
and often the historical inaccuracies make the story worse.
Yeah.
Like usually when you actually find out what actually happened, it's much more interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Much more unique and distinctive.
That's actually very true. Anytime I've watched kind of like a biopic or anything like that, when you actually go and find out a little bit more, do a little bit more digging, you kind of like a little bit more intrigued. Or you kind of find out like especially like things that they left out, which they could have probably put in as well, and it's just like a little bit more interesting than what they actually gave you.
Yeah, and we're kind of going through this wave right now of movies and shows that just respect the audience in the sense of just letting people, like giving people the information to figure it out, and then letting, like, just taking them on a ride. Like we just had Dune Part 2, which is not an easy story, but it helps you follow along that story really well. And then Shogun comes along just a few weeks after that. That is also like, it doesn't pull its punches, doesn't dumb it down as far as I could tell, and everybody loves it. So hopefully, that's the saying that Hollywood will always learn the wrong lesson no matter what. So I wonder what they learned from this one. Probably that people should curse more in dramas or something.
Yeah. We'll get
100%. Game of Thrones started out a lot like this, and then became a parody of itself. Where if you watch a season 7 episode, it felt like parody.
Yeah.
Like with all the cursing and like casual cursing especially.
You almost felt wrong for calling out season 7 as well, because like so people were so invested in the show, and I could see the downward trajectory in season 7, but everyone was still
like, I jumped off in season 5 when Arya jumped into the canals of Bravos with a stomach wound and didn't die from an infection.
Yeah.
Then for me the show was over at that point.
Yeah.
Because that's the exact opposite of what made the show great in the first place. But yeah, just the general quality of writing just went downhill. But yeah, it's my point is, like, if you take the dialogue of something like HBO Rome and then Game of Thrones and then Shogun, put them next to each other, like they're quite similar.
Yeah.
But then Game of Thrones descended into self-parody at some point. And maybe this is short enough and high quality enough that won't happen here. Like, it didn't feel gratuitous, right? They didn't just pepper it in to make people feel like to make it feel edgy or something. Like it's always a matter of character.
Yeah.
And context. Like when somebody uses a slur or curses or whatever, it always it doesn't feel like a quota. Like they pulled words out of a bucket to sprinkle on top.
No.
It always felt motivated.
Even when what's the character that the one that sort of almost kills himself when he has to go save the guy on the rope or whatever, when he goes on the rope to save the Spanish guy. What's the character?
I forget his name.
Anyway,
the minor nobles. I don't think he's around very long.
Yeah, but anyways, like even his character, when he's like making him say that, oh, I am a dog or whatever, like that, it's kind of like showing that authority, and it's done in the right way, and not put in there
it's just naked xenophobia, right? You're not Japanese, Stefano. You're not a real person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there was like something that happened before where he John's character probably acted out of character. I can't remember exactly sort of what had happened before that, but it was.
I guess his visceral contempt for Catholics.
Yeah.
Like that feels quaint to us, right? Like even if you're religious today, it just doesn't matter in that same way. But for them, it really did.
Yeah.
Like this was not that far away from the Reformation was.
No, no, but yeah, no, like you said, I feel like hopefully, like overall, we do learn the right lessons, and that you don't have to dumb things down for audiences.
Yeah.
And I mean, there is still a space for movies that are a little bit more dumbed down, or are something that kind of appeal to some of the masses and stuff like that. But in terms of like some of the franchises that I'm quite invested in, like your Marvel movies and stuff like that, you just kind of hope that from some of the mistakes that they've made in the past, they try to understand that story is king, good writing is king, and then everything else kind of supplements that essentially.
Yeah, I'm a little bit. So you bring up Disney here, and
Mhm.
Disney owning everything is kind of a cultural problem,
Mhm.
not just from a competitive standpoint, not just from a consumer rights standpoint, but also from the standpoint of everything is made for children.
Yeah.
And I think some things should be made for children, and some things should be made for adults, and some things should be made for everybody. But Disney doesn't make things for everybody. It doesn't make things for adults. It makes things for children.
Mhm.
And Star Wars has turned into that. Marvel was kind of debatable, right? But everything. But that's the reason why everything feels the same that Marvel puts out.
Yeah, essentially. And I feel like that's why they were kind of moving towards I know you probably jumped off the Marvel stuff, but that's why they were moving towards the Young Avengers, where they're introducing all of these like young characters and stuff like that. Again, like the stunt to make it for kids. But I feel like they've learned the lesson. Deadpool's going to be R-rated. I believe the Blade movie is going to be R-rated. So I feel like, again, they've learned the lesson that you do have to make things for an adult audience as well. Otherwise, you're not going to survive.
Yeah, we'll see how R-rated those get. I found kind of the first Deadpool movies kind of refreshing because of their childishness, right? And like in their use of vulgarity and all of that, it's actually quite childish. But it's refreshing from the sanitized stuff we get from the big companies like Disney. But what I was kind of getting at is like almost everything is made by companies like Disney for children, basically, and the things that are made for adult, things like Walking Dead, things like Game of Thrones, then kind of wallow in the crudeness. Like there's excessive violence, there's excessive cursing, and all of those things. And I think those things should be like a matter of style, but they often are these kinds of shows. I'm not calling out specifically Walking Dead. I've seen enough of that to really judge it. But like that kind of show seems to like really have a really immature approach to maturity. Where it just throws in, violence and cursing and all of those things as much as possible to see, hey, look, we're for adults. But there's very little that is actually mature and actually sophisticated. And I think Shogun really strikes this balance quite well, where these things are there for a reason, and there's somebody being boiled alive, and there's all sorts of harsh stuff, but it doesn't feel gratuitous. It doesn't feel just for shock value. It feels like it's telling a story and it's characterizing these people in this place.
That's one thing that I don't know whether it has gone anywhere, because obviously you had that guy where he was very interested in hearing people's last few moments before they died or whatever, and I don't know whether that's really been revisited or whether that might continue later on in the season. Again, I'm only 3 episodes in, but it seems like that was like introduced, and that was like something specific about his character that hasn't completely been followed through.
I'm not too sure about that. Like, it seems to be like just an affectation of this one guy, because all the other Japanese characters seem to find it embarrassing.
Yeah.
And it kind of paints Japan as this brutal and savage place, right? And that is kind of the impression. Like, that's John's first impression.
Yeah.
But then the rest of the characterization is all about. I don't know if you got to that part yet, where Mariko says at some point about how they all wear masks, and you never like underneath, don't expect our politeness for friendliness or something like that. Like she makes a very clear distinction between politeness and actually being your friend.
Yeah.
And that is something that's like foreign to John, right? Because European cultures don't work exactly in that way. But that is really heightened in the nobility of feudal Japan, right? And so that kind of stands in stark contrast to this random sadism that is one of the first pretty much the first impression we get from Japan, but then it's not actually what it's about.
Yeah.
And the show is very, very scathing of traditional Japan, right? Like at every corner, it's not portrayed as a nice place, like a place that you would want to live in. And then like this one scene kind of sticks out to me. Like it doesn't really fit with what they're doing, and also doesn't quite fit with how that culture is otherwise characterized. And if it's just this one guy's hang up, or like he has this quasi-religious fascination with death or whatever it is, I don't even know what label to put on it. I'm not sure what it's supposed to do. Like if that's what really happened, that's a different thing. But if it's a matter of showing like this is the first impression you get of Japan, I don't know what that's supposed to say.
Yeah, and I think it's that part where it's part of his character, and I'm still waiting to see why it was like kind of like emphasized early on, and like what they potentially do with it. Maybe there's like some type of payoff, especially maybe if he eventually dies and he finally like experiences that moment of just before death, and there's this whole like revelation and stuff like that. Potentially there's that. Obviously I actually didn't think about it, the whole like that being his first experience of like Japan and like the brutalism, and obviously he sees them as savages and stuff like that as well. But
it's kind of the second impression. Right? The first impression is this wonderfully written misunderstanding. About how where they are all ordered to come out, and this one guy says, "I will speak for my men, and I will come out," and like everybody's talking past each other because why wouldn't they? So I thought that was really strong, and that was really nuanced. And then the second impression is a guy is being boiled alive in soy sauce.
But did he even know? Because like, didn't he ask before they left on the boat? He was like, "Oh, like
he hears the screams." Oh, sorry.
He hears the screams. I couldn't remember whether he does or not. Because I remember him asking like, how many of his men if his men are alive, and he said, one died or whatever.
Only one died. Yeah.
Only one died. Yeah. So I couldn't remember if he'd heard it or not. But it'd probably be very difficult not to hear it.
But he's also not getting a straight answer on where his crew is, right?
Yeah.
He keeps wanting to reunite with them, and he's always being stonewalled by everybody. So I don't know if they're even still alive. I don't remember if we see them again.
I don't know. Who knows? I don't know whether he brings it up too often after he reaches Osaka.
He tries a couple of times. Like one of his demands is, "I want my ship back. I want my crew back, and then I will help you." And he's just told, "No, try again."
Yeah. Yeah. No, he's funny. He's a funny character, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, final thoughts.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm just gonna trust the show that it's as historically accurate as it can be, because I have no way of really verifying it. And that's kind of what the stuff hinges on. But on a quality level, this is wonderful. Like it's a 5 out of 6 for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, similar. I feel like there's a lot of like good moving pieces at the moment in the show. I've left it off in a very interesting place where he's just escaped. So obviously you're gonna have like the reaction, and he's just made alliances with the Portuguese as well. So you're gonna have the reaction from the other sort of Japanese sort of leaders to that, and obviously then what his plan is to then what his eventual plan is to kind of like survive and sort of maybe eventually become the shogun himself. So it's quite interesting. I'm looking forward to sort of watching a little bit more. I feel like actually doing this episode has made me want to watch more compared to when I was actually watching it, funny enough, because I think at the start I said it wasn't completely gripping, but actually like kind of like talking through and whatever, it's actually made me want to watch it a little bit more. So I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10, and I would have given it a solid 9 out of 10 before I'd even sort of before this review as well. But yeah, it just I don't know what it is. It just didn't have that initial hook that you'd want.
I'm really into feudal Japan. Like I think it's fascinating. I just don't know enough about it, or it's not as much as I would like. And I feel like this is a decent start. Yeah.
No, I agree. I'm not a big historical person to be honest. I've never been to the one to, not to say care, because care is like the wrong word, but I've never like really been that invested in like history and historical sort of different societies and stuff like that. But no, yeah, it's good. I'm enjoying it, and I will continue to watch it, and hopefully it gets to a point where I can kind of sing and shout about it like I do with all my other favorite TV shows.
Yeah, I really hope they stick the landing, and there's every reason to expect them to.
Yeah, I have faith. And yeah, what are we doing next week?
Next week is Ghostbusters Afterlife. No, Afterlife was the last one. The Frozen Kingdom.
Yeah. Have you seen any? Have you seen the past couple?
I skipped Afterlife. I regrettably watched the 2016 version, and then Afterlife I skipped. Like Ghostbusters is one of those things where like there's a couple of 70s and 80s franchises where people forgot what the joke was and they just keep making more stories with the same characters, but there's no real point. Like Predator is the same way, Terminator is the same way, Jurassic Park is the same way. They just keep making them and there's usually not a point to them. And the trailer looks extra pointless for Frozen Kingdom.
Yeah.
I'd like to I really like the idea of Ghostbusters, but my idea of Ghostbusters is not the idea of the people making this. So I'm lukewarm about it, and the trailer looks extra obnoxious with like generic humor, and I don't know. I always go into stuff with an open mind, but this has there's multiple decks stacked against this one.
I mean, I've never really been too into Ghostbusters. I'm sure I've seen like some of the classic old ones when I was a kid, but
there's one good even Ghostbusters 2 is just a rehash.
Yeah,
it's not even a different story. So if you want to watch, if you want to know Ghostbusters, just watch the first Ghostbusters movie, and you've seen it all.
Yeah, I can imagine. And actually, to your point where you're saying, we've got these franchises that kind of keep going. I feel like one that's probably done it well, and I didn't watch the classic ones, I've only watched the newer ones, is Planet of the Apes, and that's the newer ones have been like better received. And I feel like, again, I've not watched the previous ones, but it from my kind of perspective, it feels like they've probably like done something a little bit different to what they did before, or they like, and you said about like the whole point of it or whatever like that. I feel like they've probably kept the essence as well in sort of the newer movies, or that's what I get from it anyways, which is why I'm highly looking forward to the new one that's coming out this year as well. But I
watched the old movies recently, just back to back, just all 5 movies in like 2 days, and It's a wild ride. Like those movies are something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, the new, like, it's almost like a Battlestar Galactica situation where they take the same story and the same characters and the same premise, but tell a completely different story with it. And at that point, I'm fine with it again, especially since the new take is interesting and good.
Yeah. Whereas, and again, it all goes back to, do you have a story to tell? And it seems like with like your Jurassic Worlds and your Ghostbusters and stuff like that, it feels like here's a franchise that you loved. Here's we can make some more money out of this. Come and watch this movie. We're not going to really put too much thought in it. Whereas with Planet of the Apes, it feels like there is good storytelling in there.
Yeah, it's like the Planet of the Apes. Like it's made like $3 billion across 4 movies or something like that. Or maybe $2.5 billion.
Yeah,
it's really like it's like this quiet $1 billion franchise that nobody noticed, kind of thing. Like every couple of years, one comes out and people say, "Oh yeah, oh that's nice," but nobody seems to realize that it's like this franchise that has made billions and has been going on for over 10 years and has just been consistently good.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it's not really gotten that kind of attention that a lot of other movies have.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the secret of its success, that you can only do interesting things when nobody's paying attention to you. I don't know. I don't know how many more they have planned. I don't think this, like the one coming up later this year, is the last one. But I really just want them to just tell a 5-6 part story, whatever it is they have in mind, and just then stop. And then you've got a complete thing with a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah. Isn't this the new one kind of set further along in the future as well? So they've kind of completely gone away from what they were doing before. So you're not getting the same tropes of bringing back the same actors and bringing back same characters that you loved before. It's like, again, it might be linked to some of the previous sort of Planet of the Apes movies that have come out in like the 80s or 90s or whatever. It might kind of tell a similar story to that. But in terms of for the modern audience, for someone like me that's only watched the newer ones, I'm not getting the whole like, oh, this is a character that you love, come and watch them again. It's like, here's how we're going to progress the story. Here's how we're going to further sort of the universe of Planet of the Apes, which I love.
Yeah. I think it really helps that they change the status quo in every movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like every movie is a different chapter of that saga of the apes taking over. Yeah. And also the older, like the original series is kind of iconic, but it's really only the shot with the Statue of Liberty on the beach. and everything else has kind of been lost to science fiction nerddom. But if you actually watch them, there's crazy stuff in there. Like I can't even begin to summarize it.
You know me with older movies.
Yeah, but like yeah. So I mean, it's like obviously people wearing rubber masks, right, and stuff like that. But once you look like the third movie has a chimpanzee and a black American arguing over slavery. So it goes places.
Yeah, that definitely goes. Yeah, that goes places.
So and each movie is kind of stumbles along, and there isn't really an overarching plan, but somehow it's a continuous story. So it's a really interesting franchise, and also it's well known enough that people it has brand value, but it's obscure enough that people don't have a fixed idea of what it should be. So I think it exists in this very narrow golden path for franchises where if you navigate that narrow path, you can make a healthy profit while also telling good stories.
Yeah.
And I think the people stuck with Terminator movies and Predator movies can only envy that position, because they've got the exact opposite. They don't have a story, but they have a lot of iconography that they can't deviate from.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think you probably hit the nail on the head. Is that the Planet of the Apes movies, especially the newer ones, deviated enough from one another for it to not feel, for people to not.
Clear to everybody that said this is a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas Terminator, they keep bringing back Sarah Connors in different instances, and it just they're essentially trying to drag you there for Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sarah Connors or whatever, and it's just I don't know, man. Yeah, maybe that's
a story for another day, but yeah, it's a really really interesting case study, I think.
Yeah, I feel like there could be I think you mentioned it as well. That could be a good next Monday topic. Is
I call them forever franchises. Like they just won't die.
How to kill a franchise. How to kill a franchise. Respectfully.
Yeah.
I feel like that'd be a good discussion.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right.
And on that note, that's the end of the episode. Like always, if you like the show, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to comment your thoughts as well on Shogun. Are you enjoying it so far? Have you checked it out yet? Will you will you continue watching it?
Argue with us about Cleopatra.
Yeah. or do you feel like Napoleon was historically accurate and everyone else got it completely wrong? If you believe that, please let us know in the comments. Ciao.
Bye-bye.